we do know is it's a fundamental change. What we do know is we'll be treating people from India in exactly the same way as people from Romania. That, I think, is absolutely right and is fitting with a global Britain having left the European Union. The fact we're introducing criteria for the, who can come into the country, that also is a huge step in the right direction and something the British public very much want. So they're the big positives from today. The problem is the criteria themselves suggest to me that the numbers of people coming into the country from outside the European Union will be even bigger than they are today. And with no caps on numbers, you've got a possibility that this system means more immigration, not less.
This system will come into effect in a year's time or so. I mean, do you accept that there will be pressures on the economy as a result?
Look, I know that every big business wants as much cheap labour as they can possibly get. And they, of course, don't give a damn about the community, about people's quality of life. One of the reasons Brexit happened is because people started to find it hard to get their kids into the local primary school, to get an appointment at the local GPs. They saw huge changes taking place in their towns and cities. So the truth of it is, this is about numbers. Numbers matter. We've seen the British population rise by 6 million since 2001, the vast majority of that because of our immigration policies. So people want a proper system, but they want numbers reduced too.
It is about growth, it is about numbers, it's also about our GDP, and many people say that this will result in all of us being affected, people from all across the country.
Do you know, these arguments that mass migration has been good for GDP, well, just look at our productivity.
That's fact, isn't it?
Our productivity has fallen off a cliff over the course of the last 20 years by making ourselves the cheap labour capital of Europe. Overall, has not been a good thing for our economy. It's led to significant de-skilling, and we now have got to adopt a different approach.
But do migrants make a net contribution to the UK economy?
That just depends, doesn't it? But doesn't increase? Yeah, and this is why Westminster didn't understand why the Brexit vote was going to happen, because the conversation in Stoke-on-Trent is not about whether GDP is up by 0.1% per annum because of an open border policy. It is about quality of life. It is about generally having control over numbers coming into our country. And as I say, this is a step in the right direction, but it's not the full deal.
So why, in your view, is this system fair?
Well, I think it was wrong to discriminate against people from India in favour of people coming in from Romania. I think that was absolutely crazy. We should have a global approach. We should be non-discriminatory in terms of how we operate an immigration policy. I also think that to have a very big flood, and we did have a big flood, of unskilled and semi-skilled labour drove down people's wages, fundamentally changed the quality of life for millions of people in this country. So, going, as the Australians do, going with a set of criteria that says you've got to be skilled, you've got to have the right level of qualifications, you're not going to automatically qualify for free healthcare. All of those things are right. But I just think there needs to be a cap on this.
OK, you talk about discrimination, but under this new points-based system, Mr Farage, a Bulgarian welder who holds an A-level equivalence, has a job offer for £26,000 a year, doesn't speak any English, would be allowed in this country. An Italian waiter who has a job offer in a hotel at £20,000, has a languages degree and speaks fluent English, wouldn't be allowed in the country. How's that fair?
I am praising the fact that we are putting some criteria in place. We probably haven't.
How's it fair,
we
Mr.
probably haven't got the criteria right. But look, it is much better than having a complete open door, which we've had since 2004, which has, and I'm going to repeat the point again, has actually lowered the quality of life for millions of people in this country.
But in the example that I've given you, the Bulgarian worker, for example, doesn't speak any English. How's that going to improve the quality of life of people up and down the country? Look,
I understand the question, and Priti Patel better provide some answers on that.
Do you regret that poster that you put up about the country being at breaking points?
I can't regret the truth. Mrs. Merkel made...
But it wasn't the truth, because they weren't Europeans coming to the country, they were Syrians, Mr Farage.
The point was the European Union had introduced a refugee policy that said anybody that set foot on European soil, regardless where they come from, would be allowed to stay. It was total and utter madness, and very, very few
But the UK government wouldn't have let them all in, Mr. Farage.
Well, they all would have had EU passports, within the space of a few years, wouldn't they? That's the point. And actually, that decision by Merkel is fundamentally changing European politics.
Who's going to look after you when you're 85 years old and you're in need of care?
Somebody who is trained to do it.
Well, under this new system, there'll be a lot of people who won't be as fortunate as you are. The care sector, for example, says that there'll be a shortage in the next few years.
Well, luckily, that is 30 years away, that problem, as far as I'm concerned.
It's 30 years away for you, but the point is that there'll be people over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years who'll be in desperate need of care, and they won't receive anything, because this is what the care sector... I'm not saying that, Mr. Farage, this is the care industry.
Before
they
2004,
are saying that there's going to be a shortage of staff.
Before 2004, before we had an open door to 8 and then 10 former communist countries, the elderly got looked after, hotels ran, and strawberries didn't rot in the fields. And just because we've had this flood of cheap labour since 2004, I think what needs to happen here is some of the big employers need to recognise that their days of employing cheap labour, which may be good for them, but not so good for the communities into which people come, that is finished. And that is something the government's done today.
But you didn't answer my question. Who's going to look after the elderly in the next 5 years who are in desperate need of care?
As I say, the elderly will get looked after, the fruit will get picked, the hotels will, and the buses will run. And these are scare stories. We have left the European Union. The government is now in control of immigration, of work permits, of all of those things. And I've no doubt there'll be adjustments that happen every single year.
But they're not scare stories, are they, Mr. Farage? I mean, these are people who work in the care sector. These are people who work in the hospitality sector. They're the experts. They're the ones who are
They're the ones that want cheap labour. That's been the benefit. The benefit has been for big employers, they've got cheap labour. And as a result of that, we've actually seen productivity in the United Kingdom going down. The model has changed. The government has given us an intention of that today. That is a step in the right direction. But ultimately, what the public will want is to see lower numbers, and we haven't got there yet.
And what are your plans now, Mr. Farage? Are you planning to bow out of politics?
Well, I'm obviously going to keep a watching brief on what happens with Brexit. I mean, back in 2017, I listened to Theresa May, and I really believed her when she gave the Lancaster House speech, only to be completely let down. At this moment in time, I am delighted with what David Frost, the government's chief negotiator, said in Brussels 2 nights ago. We're heading in the right direction, but I will be keeping a watching brief just in case it goes wrong again.
One of the stories that we're looking at today is this debate about the Elgin marbles, Mr. Farage. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that if we hadn't been looking after the Elgin marbles, they probably would have been destroyed over the course of the last few decades. So I understand the row, but to be honest with you, I think Greece have got rather bigger problems to worry about than the Elgin marbles.
OK, Nigel Farage, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.